Hello, welcome to Facebook Live. I'm AJ Finn, author of The Woman in the Window, and I'm here with Erin Kelly, author of 6 books, including the massive bestseller He Said, She Said, and we're just going to have a very informal chat. We might sing, we won't sing.
I won't sing.
No, I thought you were going to. Okay, neither one of us will sing. I bet we just lost most of the audience.
Okay.
Yes, but we're going to chat. So, if I may start by giving you the third degree, interrogating you. You've written 6 books. He Said, She Said has been the biggest bestseller.
Yeah.
How does it feel at this point in your career to be scaling new heights?
So good.
Does it?
Yes. Amazing. So I had a really good start to my career with The Poison Tree, which...
that was R&J, Richard
That was
and
a
Judy.
Richard and Judy book, and it got turned into an ITV drama.
I didn't know that. Who was in that?
Mayanna Buring took the lead, who... she's been in Twilight and Downton Abbey, and she's a brilliant Swedish actress. And Ophelia Loverbond and Matthew Good. And that was a wonderful experience. But after that, my books, you know, kind of went up and down, as books often do. And I took a little break to write the novelisation of Broadchurch about 4 years ago. And I had some time to think and look back at books that my readers had responded to and books that maybe they hadn't so much, and I knew that I wanted to come back with a bang. And what had happened in that time between my first novel and He Said, She Said was that the market for psychological thrillers had exploded.
Yes.
So when I wrote The Poison Tree, in fact it was quite hard for my agent to sell.
Yes.
Because publishers were saying, it's kind of women's fiction and also literary and also crime. Well, if you think of a Venn diagram with those three things in the middle, it's the novels that we write, it's psychological thrillers. But in that time, you know, Gone Girl and Before I Go to Sleep and The Girl on the Train had all happened, and I knew that I had to come back with something extra if it wasn't to be lost in a flood of similar books. And I, not cynically, but deliberately looked at what people had responded to before, and female friendship and toxic love stories and big twists are the things that seem to draw readers in. And so those were the 3 ingredients that I was determined to include.
But to be fair to you, your books had always included those ingredients in varying ratios.
They had, but it was the first time I'd had space from writing my own original books to sit back and there was a pattern then of what I'd written before, and it was the first time I had space to really identify the things that had worked and the things that readers hadn't necessarily responded to. So when I write pure crime, so I wrote a novel, The Ties That Bind, about a gay journalist investigating an old gangland killing in the 60s, and I'm very proud of it, but it wasn't similar enough to the other books for those readers to come with me. So I knew I had some people to win back, and that's what I tried to do. And thank goodness it worked.
Thank goodness it worked. How did Broadchurch come about, your novelisation?
Yeah, I had to audition.
Did you?
I had to write so I know that there were a handful of authors up for the gig, and we all had to turn the first act of the book, which most people are familiar with. It is the moment up until Beth sees her son's body on the beach, that iconic shot of the Jurassic Cliffs down in Dorset, and I had to turn that into a few chapters of a book and then wait to find out, just like actors do after the casting. And I got that gig.
Was it nerve-wracking, that process?
Yeah, but I felt quietly confident. I had a real sense of ownership about Broadchurch before I even was asked to try out for it, because my sister sent me a text during the first episode and said, "Are you watching ITV? It feels like something you would write. It feels like one of your stories."
It does.
And yeah, thank you. Well, it is now.
Yes.
I got but it was a joy, because it was everything that I love about writing. All of the, you know, able to really get stuck in at sentence level and character work without any of the hard graft of plotting. I mean, which comes easier to you? I find that words and character are the treat after the plotting.
So I worked in publishing for 10 years, and I'd never pursued creative writing before writing my book. Going into it, I assumed that the plotting would prove difficult because, again, I'd never told a story before, whereas as a PhD student and as a publisher, I'd written quite a lot. I'd written everything from a doctoral dissertation to book copy. To my surprise, the plotting actually came quite readily, very readily. Within about 48 hours, I'd mapped out my entire book. It was the writing, the sentence-level composition that took a year.
And so I'm surprised by that, because
it
seems like an incredibly intricate book to lay down in 2 days. I mean, when you say you had it mapped out, does that mean you knew where the big twists were going to land and you knew exactly how you were going to do it, or you had a sort of skeleton and the rest was fine-tuning?
It was the latter, really. It did not require much work on the narrative level from when I started outlining it to when I finished it. Adderall is a great drug, so that helped a lot.
Yeah, it's harder to get here.
I know, right? Everything is. Damn that NHS. I'm kidding. I love socialized medicine. We could take a lesson from you. But going back to you, if I may shine the spotlight back, how did you get started?
I always wanted to do it, which is the story that you always hear. You rarely meet a writer who wasn't in love with books from the day they learned to read. And I had a cousin who was a journalist and once casually mentioned, oh, why don't you just become a journalist? It's really easy to get a book deal if you've already got your name in print somewhere. So that's what I did after a series of dead-end jobs. I was a feature writer for magazines and newspapers, and I did that for about 10 years.
Yes.
And that's how I got over my stage fright of the blank page. So that by the time The Poison Tree was kind of ready to hatch, and it had a 30-year gestation period because it was the book, it was the culmination of everything I'd read and loved, and and I thought about it for a long time before I began to write it. By the time it was ready to hatch, I didn't get a feeling you get with lots of first-time writers, which is that, a fear, I'm not entitled to do this, I'm not a writer, this doesn't happen to people like me. I'd got all of that out of my system when I was a rookie journalist.
Yes.
And I did go through all that. I did go all through, well, who am I I didn't have any formal training, and I was, I would often find myself quite out of my depth with trained and experienced reporters, which was a sign that I probably should have packed it in long before I did. Only sued twice though, and it was never brought all the way to court.
Well done,
so I
you.
think that's not bad for
in Britain, no less. That's quite a thing.
And I think I'd wanted to write a book. I was really heavily influenced by Barbara Vine, and like 90% of writers my age and in my genre, I have read my copy of The Secret History.
Yes.
Until it's fallen apart.
Yes.
And The Poison Tree just kind of grew and grew and grew, and then I got pregnant and I had a biological deadline, and I wrote that book in 6 months.
Wow.
And I remember when I was first meeting publishers, said, book a year, no problem. Never done it again. Never done it since. 18 months now on a good book.
Learned your lesson, didn't you? Yeah. Gillian Flynn once said to me that her training as a journalist, and she worked as a television critic for Entertainment Weekly for a number of years, really helped her as a novelist, because when you're a journalist, you have to bash out copy. You cannot wait for the muse to call. You just need to do it.
Yeah.
Has that been your experience?
Yeah, I never get writer's block in the sense of no ideas. I paint myself into corners all the time, and I get plot stuck. But yeah, I show up to work every day. Although I'm getting better at understanding that a day at the beach or a day chain watching Netflix is as much part of the process as being there. Sometimes I find it quite hard to shake off that mentality of being an office worker and being seen to be present, even though nothing's actually happening, which of course does more harm than good. But did you? I teach sometimes, and I found that teaching actually is inhibiting as much as it's instructive when it comes to write, because all I can think of, I find it difficult to put down my editing brain.
Yes.
I can foresee all of the ways that I might do that, and I can also foresee all of the problem, which also I think comes with experience. But I was wondering how easy it was for you to switch off your editing head, or did you just kind of seamlessly incorporate it into your writing head, and if so, how did you do that? And please tell me.
Seamlessly is generous, but actually I was thinking about my editorial career when you were speaking about confidence, really, and how, like many young writers, you had to get confidence issues out of your system. During my 10 years in publishing, on those fleeting occasions when I would think to myself, maybe I should try this, I would read a manuscript by an author, and I'd think, where do they get the chutzpah? What makes them so confident that people will invest time and money in their work? Because often their work was good, sometimes their work wasn't so good, but plainly they all believed that they were entitled to an audience of some description. And it took me a while to work through that too. And what I realized is that no one, for the most part, is more entitled than anyone else to an audience. Not everyone can write, not everyone can tell a story, but you're as entitled to an audience as I am, and vice versa. I would argue you're probably more entitled, actually. You know what you're doing. Going back to your question about editorial and my editor brain, I write in sequence, and The Woman in the Window is chopped up into 100 bite-sized chewable chapters. So I would write chapter 1, switch gears, I'd toggle into editor mode, and obnoxious as that sounds, it actually worked, and it was.
So you edit as you go along?
Yes, I do. Yep, I would spit polish the chapter, return to writer mode, make a few revisions, go back to editor mode, and then move on. I had put the chapter to bed. I did not revisit it.
Wow.
Is that how? That is not how you work, I
No.
take
Oh
it.
my gosh. Can you see from? No. I write my way into scenes, so I don't write chronologically for a start. I write what I think are the most interesting scenes in the book. And then I find ways to make them fit together, or more usually I work out what the obstacle needs to be between that scene and that scene. So this is how it should fit together, but here is how I can make it fit together in a way that's going to wrong-foot the reader.
Okay.
Because I'm always thinking about that. I'm always thinking about misdirection and reverse engineering twists and how I can make that happen. And it doesn't happen on the first draft. And with every book I have a document that I call the appendix. And that's where I cut and paste things that I've written. Sometimes it's just to help me get to know a character. And sometimes it's that I will write a whole plot strand that just doesn't work out.
Yes.
And for most of my books, the appendix is 4,000 or 5,000 words long.
Right, that's significant.
For He Said, She Said, it was, I think, about 10,000 words long. And for the book I've just finished, it's 50,000 words.
50.
50,000 words of directions I wanted to go in, of twists that I thought I could make work. And actually, I had a very clever idea for a twist that I ended up dumping. The book is still full of reveals and all of the stuff you'd expect, but there was I think if you're not careful, you can be so enslaved by the idea of having the word twist on the cover of your book that it would have undermined everything else about the story.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the bravest things I've ever done, to know that I'm sacrificing a book that's easy to sell.
Yes.
For a book that's rewarding to read. It's still easy. My editor's going to kill me for saying that my book's not going to be easy to sell, but you know what I mean.
Have fun with that. Yes.
It's not a cheap trick. It's not a gimmick, and that's what it would have been if I had used this twist. And actually, something came out of it that I think is much better than the original thing I wanted to do. So yeah.
As is sometimes the way. As is often the way, I would argue.
But what I do, which is quite tragic, is I keep my favourite pretty sentences and then I yank them out and put them in the next book.
Man, is that hard. Killing your darlings, as they say in the US. It is tough. And as someone who responds to prose such as your own, I find that particularly difficult. Yeah.
And I also have now a repetitions cheat as well, so how far are you into the follow-up to Woman in the Window?
Not far enough.
Okay. So when you get to the end, you'll find, well, you must have seen with your own authors as an editor that there are certain phrases and tics and character traits that people can't leave alone.
Yes.
So I've got a chart on my study wall that says no more, and it's eyebrows may no longer disappear under hair. No one's allowed to contemplate anything over a steaming mug.
Right.
There are methods of death I can't use anymore because they've happened more than once. So I can't have any more defenestrations.
Okay.
I think vehicles are probably off the menu for a while. I can't have anybody turning out to be alive who was presumed dead, or vice versa. Not for a good few books. And that's the real challenge of being 6 or 7 books in, because the one I've just started is number 8.
Yes.
It's to me actually that to write suspense, there needs to be, you need to get blood on the walls at some point. But the method of dispatch is the least interesting thing about it to me. I'm not. I admire ingenious methods of murder, but it's far more likely to be a kind of loss of temper and a shove down the stairs.
Yes.
Because that's how most murders happen.
Yes.
Than it is, a kind of icicle that's used to stab somebody through the heart and then chucked on the fire.
Yep.
Just thinking of new ways to kill people. It's exhausting.
Well, I have 2 responses to that. The first is that having only written the one book, 1.5, I should say, I had not even considered the difficulty in varying one's narrative methods. I do pay a lot of attention to the words I use. I find people nod all the time in my books. I've got to stop them nodding.
But the thing is, they do.
That people do nod.
We're nodding now. So
the trouble is, there's not another word for nod. At least not that I'm aware of.
Looking
like
in
inclined
eyes
her
is
head.
another one.
I always look people in the eye.
And then you get people kind of glancing and looking askance, and then you tie yourselves up into these awful knots of clunky writing. So yeah, it's
because it starts to feel like an ophthalmological issue, like they're always looking around, like they can't control their retinas. The other response I had, I wanted to know which has been the most difficult book for you to write, given the difficulties you've just described in reserving narrative firepower for later books.
Yeah, the one I've just finished.
What has it been?
Because it's also got a really ambitious structure. So another thing I do to stop myself getting bored, as well as keep my readers interested, is I like to structure every book in a different way. So He Said, She Said, for example, has 2 timelines. It's husband and wife, So you've got two opposing views then. You've got present day narrative, and then you've got a backstory that starts in the 90s and works its way up to the present day. So I thought that was hard work until I wrote the new one, which jumps back a couple of decades with every act. So it's a 3-act book, and it starts in the present day. It's about a woman whose husband buys her a flat in a luxury flat in a former asylum, and we know that she's got a past there. And every time the act changes, we go back in time, so we don't return to that narrative. So it was, and it seemed like such a good idea at the time. I thought that'll stop me getting bored, and it did. But you know, intriguing. 45,000 words or 50,000 spare words later, it was definitely something that I had to write my way into.
Yes.
So
did you look at other stories that have been told in reverse, like Memento?
No, I didn't. I did reread The Night Watch by Sarah Waters, which does that, but only after I'd finished, only when I was on my final draft, because it's a real fine line, isn't it, between being inspired and subconsciously plagiarising away and stealing. I mean, The Night Watch is a very different book to mine, and it's thrilling, but it's not a thriller. And it doesn't necessarily require the same level of cliffhanger and questions and problem solving. I also read a really good book by Julie Cohen called Together, which is in a completely different genre. It's
out now, I believe.
It's a love story, essentially, that begins on the last day of a couple's relationship and walks back. So it's not new, you know, it's been done, the kind of backwards thing has been done before, but I'd never done it.
Yes.
And so for me, it was something different. And Ties That Bind, for example, is the only book I've ever written that doesn't have a single flashback in it.
Right.
It starts on day one, and it takes you up to the end of the story.
Totally linear.
Yeah, and I found that almost more challenging than anything else. Because the only way to do it is to have an investigator and lock them inside one head, one place. And in that sense, it was true crime. You know, it's the closest I've ever got to procedural.
Yes.
Broadchurch doesn't count because I didn't make that story up.
Sure.
But did you ever think of writing The Woman in the Window any other way? Did you ever think of doing it without the framing of Anna's flashbacks? I mean, difficult to do when the mystery of why she has PTSD is a big part of the plot engine. But
I'm going to sound so obnoxious. I didn't. For whatever reason, this book sprang into my head kind of fully formed, and then I just delivered it. It took a year to deliver, but I will say the second book is giving me much more, I wouldn't call it trouble, it's much more challenging. It's a bigger book, there were more characters, they actually set foot outside, which makes it a refreshing change of pace, let me tell you that. But there are flashback sequences, and I'm struggling with how to handle them. As you will know from your own writing, you don't want to spend too long in the past, because then you lose the thread of the present day story. Equally, you have to give due deference to the past, because you don't want someone randomly remembering something and describing it in a sentence.
How far into the past does it go?
20 years.
Yeah, I found that's one thing that I've had such good feedback on. People loving, so people are always writing to me about The Poison Tree, my first book. I still get, even now with this book outselling The Poison Tree by about 3 to 1.
Yes.
I still get more emails about that book, and specifically the ending of that book, than anything. But one email that I get time and time again is, I love the kind of 90s nostalgia in that book. And I also get it from people who were young in the 70s, 60s, 80s. Lots of people, you know, have had that kind of sort of dip their toe in subculture for a summer and then re-emerge to put on a suit and leave all that behind, hopefully without a kind of trail of blood and bodies in their wake. But it's something, it definitely seems to be one of the things that people enjoy. And I had the same feedback about The Sick Rose, which was partly set in the late 80s and the 90s. I mean, 90s nostalgia is a phrase that keeps coming up. This is something readers have generated, not me. I mean, I am not particularly nostalgic for death and rape.
But I'm
very nostalgic for the 90s. I had a great time. But it's definitely, it's, you know, people like to luxuriate in that if you can recreate enough of a vibe. Certainly that's what they say to me.
That's what you're told. For the viewers who have not spent a lot of time in publishing, either on one side of the desk or the other, I did want to ask a question about titles, which we were discussing earlier. In America, your book, The Sick Rose, was published as The Dark Rose. I was wondering if you felt comfortable commenting on title changes, which is something I dealt with all the time as a publisher of UK authors.
Yeah, of course. The Sick Rose, I'm not actually sure in retrospect the Sick Rose was a great title, because there's something about the word sick that isn't particularly appetising. Also, of course, now I'm far too old to ever use the word sick, as my young cousins would, and say, sick man, they're sick. I couldn't do that.
Don't they say ill sometimes too?
Or do they? I think
they do. We're not that demographic.
So, you know, so that possibly undermined it. But yeah, the Dark Rose was a compromise I agreed on with my then publisher.
Okay.
And it fits. It's not, you know, Rose sickness is actually a metaphor in the book. It's about a woman who falls in love with somebody who she thinks at first is a reincarnation of the boyfriend she murdered when she was young. And there was a quite laboured metaphor about how a rose can never grow where an old rose was. It's actually really boring and to do with nitrates in the soil.
Oh.
But and I
wish you hadn't told me that.
It's also a Blake poem that I really enjoy. And my first 3 novels took their titles from William Blake poems. And I didn't mind that. We fought over, well, not fought, there were some enthusiastic discussions about He Said, She Said.
Oh, I think that's
as a title.
Brilliant title.
I was really married to it from the beginning, and I can see why my editor had doubts, because it can sound a bit rom-com. If it wasn't present, now the way they presented it, it works brilliantly, because clearly everything about that cover sums up everything I wanted to do with the book.
Yes.
So keeping the title, I wasn't completely closed-minded, but nothing came up in our chats that I thought served the book better than He Said, She Said. And actually it turned out, or depressingly, it turned out to be incredibly timely, because I wrote the book long before the Harvey Weinstein scandal or Bill Cosby
and Me Too
and Time's Up. But I think a week before the book came out, the headline of the cover page of, I think it was the New York Times, was a picture of Bill Cosby and all his accusers. And the headline was, He Said, She Said.
Oh, that's amazing.
She said, she said. And so I unwittingly captured something. So not only was it a zeitgeist, it works as well because it's a dual narrative. And
totally works.
And that's how the midsection of the book centers around a rape trial. And that is how we try acquaintance rape. You know, it is one word against another. So that one, I dug my heels in. I had let publishers change my titles in the past. The Ties That Bind was going to be called Ransom Soul, which came from a psalm, and Hodder thought that that the Ties That Bind was a bit more commercial. I mean, it's an easier phrase to...
You remember it. You
remember it. It's also an episode of Pokémon, which is a sure sign you're onto a winner.
I was just about to say that is a Pokémon
and a Springsteen song. But I mean, was that your title from the get-go?
We didn't have a title until literally 3 hours before the book was submitted.
Really?
Yeah. And I remember thinking...
You didn't even have a working title?
Did not have a working title.
What was your file called?
Untitled. I think it was called Untitled. Yes, book.
I delivered that to my agent with the term book.
Book. Wait, this one you delivered as book.
Might have been this one. Might have been the. I think so. Yeah, because I had a feeling that my publishers
would put up a bit of a.
Yeah, because it was also a departure from what I'd had before.
Yeah.
But I wanted something super commercial.
Yeah.
And the thinking was that it might almost backfire and be too commercial.
Sure.
And be too. Too difficult to, it can sound glib out of context, but like I said, the cover and the marketing and all the publicity that we did around it made it very clear what it was about. So, but
and anyway, I think underscored the sophistication of the book.
Oh, thank you.
I think so.
Yeah.
But yes, so 3 hours before the book was submitted, it didn't have a title. I knew very firmly that I did not want to use the word girl, simply because, for one thing, it's everywhere. For another, and I'd be interested in your take on this as a woman, as a guy, I find it quite condescending for the most part. I think there are exceptions. Gone Girl to me is a title that bristles with irony, because that is a book about the way that men taxonomize and reduce and infantilize women. And there are other exceptions as well. But if you are 18 years of age or older, or depending on your state or country, 16, and you are female, then you are legally and in most cases biologically a woman, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm a 38-year-old man. I don't want to be referred to as a boy. There's nothing wrong with being a woman. In my view.
I enjoy it. Yeah.
Works for you? Yeah? You're going to stick with it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Girl does trip off the tongue easier.
Yep,
It's the only problem I have with it is just it sounds... I mean, Gone Girl was a perfect storm of everything, in my opinion. I think it's a fantastic book. But also the title does serve that book very well. I know The Girl on the Train wasn't Paula's working title either.
Interesting.
I think she wanted to call it Rachel on the Train, so that was something that came up with and it worked fantastically.
Yep.
For her, yeah, but there did come a point about 3 years ago when we had enough girls.
Yes.
And I mean, the girl books are still coming.
They are.
You know, there are other things for me to get outraged about. One of the titles I wanted to call The Ties That Bind was The Girl in the Red Coat, and that was about a woman. The woman in question was in the wearing a red coat.
Was that the title of another novel?
Yes, it was, and it went on to sell absolutely shed loads.
Yes,
and it's a brilliant book.
Yes,
and I'm glad that she got that title because it was perfect for her book in a way that it wouldn't have been for mine. So
that seems just.
Yes,
that's cosmically correct. Yes,
you couldn't imagine her novel being called anything else. And they were published so close together that one of us would have had to bow down anyway. So, it's annoying, but I'm glad. Also, Woman and Window goes so well.
I think it works. It's the name of a classic film from 1943, directed by Fritz Lang. So for those who are familiar with that particular slice of noir, it's a little.
And it recalls Rear Window, as does the book, which is.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes. So are we allowed to talk about film or TV adaptations of He Said, She Said? Is there anything in the works?
Yeah, it's being developed by. It's been developed by Amblin Entertainment in the States.
Steven Spielberg's company.
Steven Spielberg's company. Haven't met him yet, sadly. But it is. I know that the showrunner is writing a pilot for them now, and I don't think I can. I don't think I'm allowed to say what he wants to do with it because, apart from anything else, I want everybody to be amazed if it gets made. But I think they had a lot of pitches that wanted to do something a bit like The Affair. You know, tell a story from the male point of view and then the female, and the kind of cracks in the middle of where it goes. But the idea that he has is so inventive and so clever and so stylish that if it gets made, it's going to be 8-part network TV. Or no, 8-part maybe cable TV, I think.
That's exciting.
We when I met the writer, we went for coffee, and I remember thinking I had a whole day to fill between seeing him and my evening appointment, and I ended up being late for it. Because
really?
we were just throwing so many ideas around.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's really thrilling. But
so
you have a movie.
Yes, they start shooting August 5th. It's going to be released October 4th, 2019.
And who's playing Anna?
Amy Adams. And Julianne Moore is playing the maybe murder victim. Okay. And I'm going to be super coy. There's a major British actor who's just signed on, but I can't say who it is yet.
Can you tell me afterwards?
I will totally tell you afterwards. Yeah. Yes. And it's directed by Joe Wright, an Englishman who made
I love Joe Wright.
Darkest Hour and Atonement, Pride and Prejudice, Anna Karenina.
That's so funny. I was doing a questionnaire for one of my foreign publishers this morning, and they said, who would you like to direct your next book? And I said, Joe Wright.
Oh, you're kidding?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think he directs women really well.
He directs them. Hannah, great movie.
And he also really understands buildings. Not all directors do. Kubrick was the same, you know, interiors are really well done. I mean, Joe Wright does huge wide shots as well.
Yes.
Brilliantly.
Like that amazing shot in Atonement. Yeah.
Yeah. Or I'm thinking there's lots of, you know, the way London, the outside of London looks in Darkest Hour with all those kind of pea supers. He's brilliant at that, but he's very good at indoors. Yeah. And not everybody nails it.
Not everyone can be. Yeah. Yes. So I'm excited.
Oh, lucky you.
Thank you. Right, I know.
And who's did you adapt it?
I did not. A Pulitzer-winning playwright called Tracy Letts, who wrote August Osage County, adapted it. So he has a Pulitzer. I don't yet.
Did you? Did you want to?
No. I just thought this is not an opportunity for me to try something new. It's a major movie. So I'm just getting word that we are about out of time. So Erin and I, speaking on Erin's behalf, I assume you would like to, as would I. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks again for joining us. This has been AJ Finn, author of The Woman in the Window, with Erin Kelly, author of 6 books, including He Said, She Said. Bye-bye.